I sat at Christmas dinner with my father, Robert, and stepmother, Brenda, staring at the beautifully set table adorned with my grandmother's china that I had inherited but graciously let them use. The turkey was perfectly golden, candles flickered warmly, and everything seemed picture perfect until my father slammed his fork down mid-meal. His face twisted with cold determination as he declared me a leech who needed to move out immediately after the holidays because I was bleeding them dry. I stared in complete shock while Brenda smirked knowingly beside him, and I realized this ambush had been carefully planned. The dining room fell into deathly silence, except for the Christmas carols playing softly from the old radio on the kitchen counter, their cheerful melody now mocking the destruction of my world. My name is Dale, and 8 months earlier I had moved back into my childhood home with my 16-year-old daughter Emma after my divorce from Marcus became final. I thought I was coming home to heal and rebuild, but apparently I had walked straight into a trap I never saw coming. When I first arrived last spring, Dad seemed genuinely happy to have us there. The house felt too big and lonely for him after Mom passed away 3 years ago, and I thought my presence brought him comfort. I had been covering the mortgage payments, all utilities, groceries, and even Dad's medical bills since he told me he'd lost his job at the manufacturing plant where he had worked for 22 years. I never questioned it because helping family felt like the right thing to do. Everything changed when Brenda slithered into our lives 6 months ago. Dad met her at some coffee shop downtown, and within 2 weeks, she had moved her belongings into Mom's former sewing room. From day one, Brenda made subtle comments about how I was taking advantage of Dad's generosity, how I should be more grateful, how I needed to contribute more around the house. I ignored her poisonous whispers because I figured she was just trying to establish her place in Dad's life. But sitting at that Christmas table watching Dad's rehearsed speech about my freeloading behavior, I finally understood the scope of Brenda's manipulation. She had been systematically turning him against me for months, planting seeds of resentment and entitlement. Dad listed my supposed sins with the precision of someone who had practiced this speech multiple times. I left dishes in the sink, I used too much hot water, I hogged the television in the evenings, I made too much noise getting ready for work in the mornings. Each accusation felt like a slap because none of it was true. I worked 12-hour shifts as a medical technician at the county hospital and barely had time to eat, let alone create household drama. When I was home, I spent most of my time helping Emma with homework or catching up on laundry in the basement. I had been walking on eggshells around Brenda, trying to keep peace in a house that was becoming increasingly hostile. Brenda sat there nodding approvingly at every word Dad spoke occasionally, adding her own commentary about how difficult it was to live with someone so inconsiderate. She talked about wanting privacy as a newlywed couple, about needing space to build their relationship without interference from ungrateful children. The way she said it made my skin crawl because I realized she had been monitoring my every move, cataloging perceived slights to use as ammunition. Dad kept talking about how I needed to learn independence and responsibility, completely ignoring the fact that I had been financially supporting the household since my arrival. He talked about tough love and how kicking me out would ultimately help me grow as a person. The irony was suffocating because I had been the responsible one, the one keeping the lights on and food on the table, while he supposedly searched for new employment. As the conversation continued, I noticed Brenda kept glancing toward the hallway, and something about her nervous energy made me suspicious. After dinner, when Dad went outside to smoke and Brenda retreated to their bedroom, I decided to investigate. I had been noticing that some of my mail had been going missing, particularly financial documents and credit card statements that should have arrived weeks ago. I quietly climbed the stairs and noticed Brenda's bedroom door was slightly ajar. Inside, I could see papers scattered across her dresser, and my heart nearly stopped when I recognized my own Social Security number on several documents. Moving closer, I discovered a stack of credit card applications and statements all in my name, but with charges I had never made. expensive jewelry designer handbags, weekend trips to casinos, restaurant bills that totaled hundreds of dollars. Brenda had been stealing my identity for months, opening credit cards in my name and maxing them out for her own shopping sprees and gambling habits. The bills had been intercepted and hidden in her bedroom, creating a mountain of debt that would eventually destroy my credit score. She had been methodically ruining my financial future while simultaneously convincing my father that I was a burden who needed to be eliminated. Standing there holding evidence of her betrayal, I realized this Christmas dinner ambush was never about my behavior or Dad's need for space. It was about removing me from the picture so Brenda could continue her fraud without interference while also gaining complete control over Dad and the house that she obviously saw as her ticket to financial security. I didn't confront Dad or Brenda that night. Instead, I quietly returned to my room and began planning my exit with the same methodical precision that Brenda had used to plan my destruction. Emotional reactions would only give them ammunition to use against me later, so I focused on protecting Emma and myself through careful documentation and strategic thinking. The first call I made was to my best friend Sarah, who worked in real estate and had always been my voice of reason during difficult times. She immediately offered us her couch for as long as we needed and promised to help me navigate the legal implications of what I had discovered. Sarah lived 20 minutes away in a quiet neighborhood where Emma could finish her school year without major disruption. While Emma slept, I spent the entire night photographing everything. I documented every bill I had been paying, every contribution I had made to the household, every piece of evidence that proved my financial responsibility. I photographed the fraudulent credit cards and applications in Brenda's room, making sure to capture the forged signatures and unauthorized charges. I took pictures of text messages from Dad asking me for money over the past 8 months, screenshots of bank transfers I had made to cover household expenses, and copies of receipts showing my grocery purchases and utility payments. I also discovered something that made my blood boil. Hidden in Dad's desk drawer was a folder containing printouts of my bank statements, which meant Brenda had been monitoring my finances much more closely than I realized. She knew exactly how much money I earned, how much I had in savings, and how much I was contributing to the household. This wasn't random identity theft. It was calculated financial abuse designed to drain my resources while positioning me as the problem. When Emma woke up the next morning, I explained the situation honestly but gently. At 16, she was old enough to understand that we were being manipulated and needed to protect ourselves. She had already noticed Brenda's hostile behavior and had been feeling uncomfortable in the house for weeks. Emma helped me pack our belongings efficiently, making sure we took only what belonged to us while leaving no trace of drama or destruction. As we packed, I started making phone calls to utility companies, banks, and service providers. I needed to understand exactly what accounts were in my name and how much control I actually had over the household finances. What I discovered was both empowering and infuriating. Since I had been the primary account holder on most utilities and had been making the mortgage payments, I had significant legal power to make changes. The mortgage situation was particularly interesting. Dad had refinanced the house 6 months ago, right around the time Brenda moved in, but I discovered that my signature on the refinance documents had been forged. Since I had been making the payments and could prove it through bank records, I had legal grounds to challenge the refinance and remove my financial responsibility for a loan I had never legally agreed to. While going through my paperwork, I found something that made everything click into place. Hidden inside an old photo album was a recording device that I had never seen before. It was small, digital, and had been recording our conversations about money and household expenses for months. Dad had been secretly documenting our discussions about finances, probably planning to use the recordings to paint me as manipulative or demanding in some future legal proceeding. This discovery revealed the true scope of their planning. They hadn't just been plotting to kick me out, they had been building a case to justify it, collecting evidence to make themselves look like victims of my supposed manipulation. The recordings would have been edited and taken out of context to support whatever narrative they planned to construct about my character and behavior. But their meticulous planning was about to become their downfall because I was equally capable of strategic thinking and I had truth on my side. I carefully removed the recording device and added it to my growing collection of evidence, then continued packing while formulating a plan that would expose their fraud and protect my future. By noon, Emma and I had loaded everything into my car and driven to Sarah's house, leaving behind only the furniture that had belonged to Dad originally. I left no note, no explanation, no dramatic confrontation. I simply removed ourselves from a toxic situation and began the process of removing Brenda's access to my financial life. That afternoon, I called the police to report the identity theft and made an appointment with a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud. I also contacted a private investigator that Sarah recommended, someone who could help me dig deeper into Brenda's background and discover the full extent of her criminal activity. I was done being a victim. It was time to fight back. The next morning, I woke up at Sarah's house with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. Emma was still sleeping on the air mattress we had set up in Sarah's spare room, and I could hear Sarah making coffee in the kitchen. For the first time since moving back to Dad's house, I felt safe and in control of my own destiny. I spent the entire day systematically dismantling every financial connection between myself and Dad's household. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting my future and ensuring that Brenda couldn't continue using my identity and resources to fund her destructive lifestyle. The first call I made was to the mortgage company, armed with documentation proving that my signature had been forged on the refinance documents. I was able to remove my name from the loan and stop the automatic payments that had been coming from my checking account. The mortgage representative was surprisingly helpful once I explained the identity theft situation and provided my police report number. Next, I contacted every utility company. Since all the accounts were in my name and I had been making the payments, I had the legal right to disconnect services or transfer them to a different address. I canceled the electricity, natural gas, water, sewer, trash, pickup, cable, television, and internet service. Each representative asked if I wanted to transfer services to my new address, and I politely declined, explaining that I was moving in with family temporarily. The phone service was particularly satisfying to disconnect because Dad's cell phone was part of my family plan, and Brenda had somehow convinced him to add her phone to the account as well. When I canceled the plan, both of their phones immediately stopped working, cutting off their ability to harass me or coordinate their next moves. I also discovered that Brenda had somehow gotten herself added as an authorized user on my auto insurance policy, claiming to be my sister-in-law. This explained how she had been able to access my personal information so easily. I removed her from the policy and changed all my passwords and security questions to prevent further unauthorized access. The banking situation required more delicate handling. I couldn't simply drain accounts that Dad had legitimate access to, but I could withdraw the funds that I had personally contributed. Over the past 8 months, I had deposited over $15,000 into Dad's checking account to cover household expenses. Using my bank records and receipts as documentation, I was able to withdraw $12,000, leaving enough to cover 1 month of basic expenses. While handling the banking, I made another shocking discovery. Dad's health insurance had been canceled 3 months ago, not because he lost his job, but because he voluntarily quit and never applied for COBRA coverage. I had been paying for his expensive prescription medications out of pocket, thinking his temporary insurance gap was just a bureaucratic delay. In reality, he had been letting me cover medical expenses that should have been his responsibility, while he and Brenda spent his unemployment benefits on entertainment and gambling. I immediately canceled the automatic payments for his medications and removed him from my employer's health insurance plan, where I had added him as a dependent during his supposed period of unemployment. This decision was difficult because I didn't want him to suffer medically, but I realized that enabling his deception was ultimately harmful to both of us. The most disturbing discovery came when I started investigating Brenda's background more thoroughly. Using the private investigator Sarah had recommended, I learned that Brenda was actually married to another man named Gary, who lived in Las Vegas, Nevada. She had never divorced Gary before moving in with Dad, which meant she was committing bigamy, in addition to identity theft and financial fraud. The marriage certificate I found hidden in her belongings confirmed that Brenda and Gary had been married for 7 years and had been running similar scams in multiple states. They would identify vulnerable, lonely men with property or savings, and Brenda would move in while Gary stayed in Nevada, managing their other criminal enterprises. Once Brenda had gained access to bank accounts and personal information, she would systematically drain resources while building a legal case to claim property in divorce proceedings. But their plan had a fatal flaw. They never expected someone like me to be living in the house, documenting everything and fighting back with legal expertise and strategic thinking. They had targeted Dad because he seemed like an easy mark, a grieving widower with property and a steady income, but they hadn't counted on his daughter being smart enough to uncover their operation. As I continued my research, I found evidence that at least 3 other women in surrounding counties had similar stories about Brenda's marriage fraud schemes. She had a pattern of targeting recently widowed or divorced men, moving in quickly, isolating them from family and friends, then systematically stealing their resources before disappearing to the next victim. I started documenting everything for the police report, building a comprehensive case that would ensure serious criminal charges. Brenda's identity theft of my personal information was just the tip of the iceberg. She was running a multi-state criminal enterprise that had been destroying families and stealing life savings for years. By evening, I had successfully disconnected every service I had been paying for and gathered enough evidence to build a federal case against Brenda's criminal operation. Tomorrow morning, Dad and Brenda would wake up to a house with no electricity, no heat, no running water, no internet, and no phone service. They would discover that their comfortable lifestyle had been entirely dependent on my financial contributions that had been taken for granted and used as justification for throwing me out of my own childhood home. I felt no guilt about the situation they would face because they had created it through their own greed and deception. Dad had made his choice when he sided with a criminal over his own daughter, and now he would experience the consequences of that choice firsthand. But I wasn't done fighting back. Tomorrow would bring the real confrontation, and I was ready. I was eating breakfast at Sarah's kitchen table when the pounding started. The angry fists hammering against the front door could be heard throughout the entire house, followed by shouting that made Emma jump and spill orange juice across her cereal bowl. Sarah looked through the window and confirmed what I already knew. Dad had discovered the consequences of his Christmas dinner ambush. "Dale, get out here right now!" Dad's voice carried across the neighborhood, raw with panic and fury. "You've destroyed everything. Fix this immediately." I walked calmly to the front door while Sarah positioned herself nearby, with her phone ready to call police if necessary. Emma stayed in the kitchen, but I could see her watching nervously from the doorway. I opened the door to find Dad standing on the porch, his face red with anger and desperation, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday. "What exactly do you want me to fix?" I asked, keeping my voice level and controlled. "You know damn well what you did," he shouted. "The power's off, the water's off, the heat's off, our phones don't work, and the internet's dead. Brenda woke up freezing cold in a house that feels like a tomb. I removed my name from accounts that I was paying for," I replied matter-of-factly. "You told me I was a leech who needed to leave, so I left and took my financial contributions with me. Isn't that what you wanted?" Dad's face twisted with frustration as neighbors began peering out their windows at the commotion. Mrs. Peterson from across the street was openly staring while walking her dog, and the young couple next door had come out onto their porch to watch the drama unfold. "You can't just leave us with no utilities," Dad protested. "That's not how family treats family." "Family doesn't ambush each other at Christmas dinner either," I said calmly. "Family doesn't call their daughter a leech for paying their bills and supporting their household. You made your choice, and now you're experiencing the natural consequences." Dad's anger began mixing with panic as he realized the full scope of what had happened. How are we supposed to shower? How are we supposed to eat? The refrigerator isn't working, and all the food is going to spoil. "The same way you would handle it if you were actually independent adults," I responded. "Call the utility companies, set up accounts in your name, and start paying your own bills like you should have been doing all along." That's when Dad's facade finally cracked and the truth started pouring out. "Brenda's gone," he said, his voice breaking with desperation. "She left sometime during the night and took jewelry and cash with her. She cleaned out the coffee can where I keep emergency money and took your mother's wedding ring set that was supposed to go to you someday." I felt a stab of pain hearing about Mom's rings, but I wasn't surprised by Brenda's theft. "Did she leave a note?" I asked. "Nothing," Dad said, slumping against the porch railing. "She just disappeared like she was never here. Her clothes are gone, her personal things are gone, and she took everything valuable she could carry." Sarah stepped forward and introduced herself, professionally explaining that she had experience with real estate fraud and could help Dad understand his legal options. She also mentioned that if he didn't lower his voice and stop disrupting the neighborhood, she would have no choice but to call the police. That's when Dad broke down completely and admitted the truth that made everything make sense. "I never lost my job," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Brenda convinced me to quit so we could collect unemployment while you supported us. She said we could save my unemployment money for a business venture. She was planning something that would make us rich and independent." The business venture, he explained, was supposed to be a partnership with someone Brenda knew in Las Vegas who specialized in flipping houses. She convinced Dad that they could use his unemployment benefits and my financial contributions to build a nest egg, then invest in real estate opportunities that would multiply their money quickly. All he had to do was let her manage the finances and trust her business expertise. "How much unemployment money did you save?" Sarah asked, though I suspected we already knew the answer. "There's nothing left," Dad admitted. "She said she was investing it, but I never saw any paperwork or returns. Every time I asked for details, she said I was being controlling and needed to trust her expertise. She made me feel stupid for questioning her decisions." I realized that Dad hadn't just betrayed me. He had been completely manipulated by a professional con artist who specialized in exploiting lonely, vulnerable people. Brenda had identified his weaknesses, his grief over Mom's death, his fear of being alone, his desire to feel important and needed, and she had used those vulnerabilities to control every aspect of his life. But even understanding that he was also a victim didn't excuse his treatment of me. He had chosen to believe Brenda's lies about my character rather than trust his own daughter, the person who had been actually supporting him and keeping him afloat during his time of need. "Dad," I said firmly, "I need you to understand something. Brenda isn't just a con artist who took your money. She's a criminal who has been stealing my identity and destroying my credit. She opened multiple credit cards in my name and maxed them out for her own spending. She's been reading my mail and monitoring my finances. And she's married to another man in Nevada, which means she was committing bigamy while living with you." Dad stared at me in shock as I explained the full scope of Brenda's criminal operation. I showed him photos of the fraudulent credit cards and forged documents evidence that proved Brenda had been systematically destroying my financial future while pretending to be his loving partner. "We need to call the police," Sarah said. "Both of you have been victims of serious crimes, and there may be a way to recover some of the stolen money if we act quickly." But Dad shook his head, suddenly looking older and more fragile than I had ever seen him. "She said she'd be back," he whispered. "She said this was just a temporary trip to handle some business in Nevada, and she'd return with good news about our investments." That's when I realized Dad still didn't understand the truth about who Brenda really was and what she had been planning all along. I looked at my father standing there on Sarah's porch, broken and confused, still clinging to the hope that Brenda might return with some magical solution to their financial problems. Despite everything he had put me through, I felt a wave of sympathy for how thoroughly he had been manipulated. But sympathy didn't mean I was ready to rescue him from the consequences of his choices. "Dad, we need to go inside and talk about this properly," I said. "The neighbors don't need to hear our family business, and there are things you need to understand about Brenda that are going to be very difficult to accept." Sarah opened her door wider and gestured for Dad to come in. He hesitated, probably realizing that entering would mean acknowledging that I was in control of the situation now, but the December cold was seeping through his thin jacket, and he didn't have many options. We sat in Sarah's living room, while Emma retreated to the spare bedroom to give us privacy. I spread out all the evidence I had gathered across the coffee table, like pieces of a puzzle that would reveal the full picture of Brenda's deception. Dad's face went pale as he recognized his own forged signature on multiple documents. "This is her real marriage certificate," I said, handing him the document I had found. "Brenda Wilson married Gary Thomas in Las Vegas 7 years ago. She never divorced him before moving in with you, which means your relationship was never legal." Dad studied the certificate with shaking hands, his face cycling through denial, confusion, and slowly dawning realization. "But she said she was divorced," he whispered. "She showed me papers." "Fake documents," Sarah explained professionally. "People who run these kinds of scams become very good at creating convincing paperwork. She probably has templates for divorce decrees, death certificates, whatever story she needs to tell her next victim." I showed Dad the credit card statements next, pointing out charges for expensive jewelry, casino visits, and restaurant bills that had all been made while Brenda was supposedly devoted to building their future together. She was spending thousands of dollars of stolen money while convincing you that I was the problem. "These charges are all from the past 3 months." Dad noticed his voice growing stronger as anger began replacing his confusion. "She was telling me we needed to be careful with money, that we couldn't afford to go out to dinner or buy anything unnecessary, because she was spending your money and my money on herself," I said. "The unemployment benefits you saved, the cash you kept in the coffee can, the money I was contributing to the household, all of it was funding her gambling and shopping habits while she made you feel guilty for wanting basic comforts." Sarah had been researching Brenda's background while we talked, using her laptop to search public records and court documents. What she found confirmed my worst suspicions about the scope of Brenda's criminal operation. There are at least 4 other men in 3 different states who have filed police reports about Brenda's marriage fraud schemes, Sarah reported. She has arrest warrants in Arizona and New Mexico, and there's an active FBI investigation into identity theft rings operating between Nevada and California. Dad looked like he was going to be sick. "How did I not see any of this?" he asked. "How did she fool me so completely?" "Because she's a professional," I said. "She studies her targets and tells them exactly what they want to hear. You wanted companionship after Mom died, so she provided that. You wanted to feel important and successful, so she made you believe you were investing in a business opportunity. You were lonely and grieving, which made you the perfect victim for someone with her skills." But then I had to address the elephant in the room, Dad's willingness to believe Brenda's lies about me rather than trust his own daughter. "Dad, what I don't understand is how you could think I was taking advantage of you when I was paying all your bills and asking for nothing in return. How could you believe I was a leech when I was working 12-hour shifts to keep your lights on?" Dad's face crumpled with shame as he realized how completely he had been turned against his own child. She was so convincing, he said. She made it sound like you were manipulating me, like you were using my grief to control me and take over my house. She said you were planning to put me in a nursing home and steal my property. And you believed her rather than talking to me directly, I said. You chose to trust a woman you'd known for 6 months over the daughter who had been taking care of you. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting our conversation. She answered and spoke quietly for several minutes before hanging up with an expression of grim satisfaction. That was Detective Williams from the county sheriff's department, she said. They've been tracking Brenda's movements since Dale filed her report yesterday. She didn't go to Nevada. She's been hiding out in a motel 20 minutes from here with Gary, her actual husband. They've been watching your house, probably planning to come back and intimidate you into signing over more assets. They're planning to come back? Dad asked, fear creeping into his voice. Not anymore, Sarah said. Police are moving in to arrest both of them this afternoon. Apparently, Gary has been running the same scam in California while Brenda worked on you here. They've been coordinating their operations to maximize their take from multiple victims simultaneously. I felt a surge of satisfaction knowing that Brenda's criminal enterprise was finally being exposed, but I also realized that Dad was going to need more help than I had initially planned to provide. He was still my father, despite his terrible judgment, and I couldn't just abandon him to deal with the legal and financial mess that Brenda had created. Dad, I said, you're going to need a lawyer and you're going to need to cooperate fully with the police investigation. There might be a chance to recover some of the stolen money if you're willing to testify against Brenda and Gary. What about the house? He asked. How am I going to keep it without utilities or income? That's when Sarah delivered news that changed everything. Actually, the house situation might not be as bad as you think. When Dale removed her name from the mortgage, it triggered an automatic review of the refinance documents. The mortgage company discovered the forged signatures and is treating this as a fraud case. They're freezing all proceedings until the criminal investigation is complete. I realized this might be an opportunity to fix some of the damage that had been done to our family, but it would require Dad to make some difficult changes and prove that he was genuinely committed to rebuilding trust between us. Over the next few hours, Sarah's house became the command center for taking down Brenda's criminal operation. I had spent months being reactive, trying to adapt to her manipulation and Dad's increasingly hostile behavior, but now I was finally in a position to be proactive and strategic about protecting my family and seeking justice. The first priority was ensuring that Dad could cooperate effectively with law enforcement. I helped him gather every document, receipt, and piece of communication he had from his relationship with Brenda. We found bank statements showing withdrawals that matched her gambling and shopping expenses, text messages where she promised returns on investments that never materialized, and photographs of expensive items she claimed to have purchased for their shared future. Sarah connected us with Detective Williams, who came to the house to take Dad's official statement about the financial fraud. The detective explained that Brenda and Gary's operation was much larger than we had initially realized, involving at least 12 victims across 4 states and total damages exceeding $200,000. Your father's cooperation is crucial, Detective Williams told me. Brenda made the mistake of leaving a detailed paper trail here, probably because she felt confident that she had eliminated any threats to her operation by turning your father against you. She didn't expect anyone to fight back with the level of documentation and evidence that you've provided. I also contacted the district attorney's office to ensure that my identity theft case was being prosecuted aggressively. The prosecutor assigned to the case was impressed by the quality of evidence I had gathered and assured me that Brenda would face serious federal charges that could result in decades in prison. But the most important part of fighting back was restoring basic services to Dad's house so that it wouldn't be condemned or damaged by frozen pipes during the winter weather. I had been angry when I disconnected everything, but I wasn't vindictive enough to let the house be destroyed when there was still a chance of rebuilding our relationship. I contacted each utility company and explained the situation, providing documentation of the identity theft and fraud case. Most of the companies were surprisingly helpful once they understood that this was a criminal matter rather than a simple billing dispute. I was able to have electricity, heat, and water restored within 24 hours, though I insisted that all new accounts be set up in Dad's name with his own deposits and credit checks. The internet and cable were more complicated because Brenda had somehow gotten herself added as an authorized user on those accounts, and the companies required police documentation before they would remove her access. But even that was resolved within a week once the criminal charges were formally filed. During this process, I discovered that Brenda had been even more thorough in her manipulation than I initially realized. She had convinced Dad to change his will, naming her as the primary beneficiary and removing me entirely. She had also gotten herself added to his bank accounts as a joint owner, which gave her legal access to withdraw funds without his permission. "Dad, you're going to need to revoke these changes immediately," I told him as we reviewed the legal documents. "If something happens to you while these documents are in effect, Brenda could claim your entire estate even from prison." Dad looked shocked as he realized how completely Brenda had positioned herself to steal everything he owned. "She said these were just temporary measures to make managing our finances easier," he admitted. "She told me it was normal for couples to have joint accounts and to plan for each other's future security." Sarah recommended an estate planning attorney who specialized in fraud cases, and we made an appointment for the next day. The attorney was able to revoke all the changes Brenda had made to Dad's legal documents and restore his original will, which left everything to me and Emma as it should have been all along. While we were handling the legal paperwork, I received a phone call that made my blood run cold. Detective Williams informed me that Brenda and Gary had been arrested at their motel, but they had been planning something much worse than simple theft. "We found detailed plans for insurance fraud," the detective explained. "They were planning to stage an accident or break-in at your father's house and claim a large insurance settlement. Your father's life insurance policy was also part of their plan." I realized that Dad's life had been in actual danger, not just his financial security. Brenda hadn't just been planning to steal his money, she had been planning to eliminate him entirely once she had gained control of his assets. The Christmas dinner ambush hadn't been about getting rid of me, it had been about isolating Dad completely so that no one would question his sudden disappearance or death. "They had forged documents ready to claim that your father had died in a home invasion," Detective Williams continued. "Your removal from the house was apparently the final step before they moved to the violence phase of their plan." Dad went completely white when he heard this information. For the first time, he fully understood how close he had come to being murdered by someone he trusted completely. The woman he had chosen over his own daughter had been planning to kill him for his insurance money. "Dale," he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "if you hadn't fought back when you did, I would be dead within a week. Your refusal to accept their treatment probably saved my life." I felt a complex mix of vindication and sadness, hearing Dad finally acknowledge the truth about Brenda's intentions. Part of me wanted to say, "I told you so," but a larger part just felt relief that he was safe and finally willing to see reality clearly. "What happens now?" Dad asked. "Now we make sure that Brenda and Gary never have the opportunity to hurt anyone else," I said, "and we work on rebuilding trust between us if that's something you actually want." Detective Williams interrupted with news that would seal Brenda's fate. "We just heard from the FBI. They've been tracking Gary's movements for months as part of a larger investigation into organized fraud rings. Your case provided the missing evidence they needed to make arrests in multiple states. Brenda and Gary won't be eligible for bail, and they're looking at federal charges that carry mandatory minimum sentences of 20 years. As we walked out of the police station that afternoon, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Brenda's criminal enterprise was finished, Dad was safe, and justice was finally being served. But the hardest part was still ahead, deciding whether our family could be repaired after everything that had happened. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse listening to the judge sentence Brenda Wilson to 25 years in federal prison for identity theft, fraud conspiracy, and attempted murder. Gary received 30 years for his role as the ringleader of their criminal organization. The FBI had traced their operation back 7 years and identified 23 victims across 6 states, with total damages exceeding $800,000. Watching Brenda in her orange jumpsuit, her blonde hair now showing dark roots, and her face free of the expensive makeup she used to wear, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This woman had tried to destroy my family, steal my identity, and manipulate my father into cutting me out of his life completely. She had planned to murder him for his insurance money after using him for everything he was worth. Now she would spend the next quarter-century thinking about her choices behind bars. The judge ordered Brenda and Gary to pay full restitution to their victims, though the prosecutor warned us that actually recovering money would be difficult since they had spent most of their stolen funds on gambling and luxury purchases. But the criminal conviction was enough for me. Justice had been served, and their ability to hurt other families had been permanently eliminated. Dad testified at the trial, providing detailed testimony about how Brenda had manipulated him and turned him against me. His testimony was crucial in establishing the pattern of psychological manipulation that was central to their criminal operation. During his testimony, Dad publicly acknowledged his mistakes and expressed regret for choosing to trust a criminal over his own daughter. "I failed as a father," he told the court. "I allowed myself to be manipulated into betraying the person who had been supporting and caring for me. My daughter Dale showed more strength and integrity during this ordeal than I showed in months of being deceived. She saved my life by refusing to accept the treatment I allowed Brenda to convince me was justified." The trial also revealed the full scope of Brenda's planning. Police found detailed notes about Dad's daily routine, copies of his medical records research into his insurance policies, and a timeline for staging his murder. She had been methodically preparing to kill him while convincing him that I was the threat to his security and happiness. After the sentencing, Dad and I walked out of the courthouse together. Our relationship had been slowly healing over the past 6 months, built on honest communication and Dad's genuine efforts to make amends for his betrayal. He had started attending counseling to address the psychological manipulation he had experienced and to work on rebuilding trust with me and Emma. The house situation had been resolved in a way that protected both of us. Since the refinance had been based on fraudulent documents, the mortgage company worked with us to restore the original loan terms. Dad legally transferred partial ownership to me in recognition of the financial contributions I had made and to protect against any future fraud attempts. This arrangement gave me legal standing to intervene if anyone ever tried to manipulate Dad again. I had decided to move into my own apartment 15 minutes away from Dad's house, close enough to maintain regular contact, but far enough to preserve my independence. Emma was thriving with the stability and had made new friends in our neighborhood. She was proud of how I had fought back against Brenda's manipulation and often told her friends about how her mom had taken down a criminal organization. The financial damage had been largely repaired. My credit score had been restored once the fraudulent accounts were removed, and I had recovered most of the money Brenda had stolen through insurance claims and restitution payments from other parts of their criminal operation. The identity monitoring service I signed up for gave me peace of mind that my personal information was protected against future fraud attempts. But the most important change was in my relationship with Dad. He had learned to recognize the warning signs of manipulation and had developed a support network that included his counselor, his neighbor, Mr. Garcia, who checked on him regularly, and a weekly dinner schedule with Emma and me. He was taking medication for depression that had probably been affecting his judgment long before Brenda arrived, and he was volunteering at a senior center where he helped other elderly people avoid financial scams. Dale, Dad said as we reached our cars in the courthouse parking lot, I know I can never fully make up for what I put you through, but I want you to know that watching you fight back taught me what real strength looks like. You saved my life, and you did it with integrity and intelligence rather than revenge or cruelty. I hugged him, feeling like I was hugging my real father for the first time in months. We're family, Dad, I said. Family protects each other even when it's difficult. 3 months after the trial, we celebrated Emma's high school graduation with a party at Dad's house. The gathering included Sarah and her family, Detective Williams, and his wife, Mr. Garcia, from next door, and several of Emma's friends and their parents. Dad stood up to make a speech, his voice strong and clear as he talked about how proud he was of Emma's academic achievements and her resilience during the difficult time our family had experienced. Then he surprised everyone by talking about me. I want to publicly acknowledge something that I should have recognized months ago, he said. My daughter Dale showed incredible strength and wisdom during the darkest period of our family's history. When I was too blind to see the truth, she fought to protect all of us. When I failed as a father, she stepped up and showed me what integrity really means. Emma, you should be proud to have a mother who faces challenges with such intelligence and courage. Standing in the backyard where I had played as a child, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about our family's well-being, I realized that Brenda's manipulation had ultimately made us stronger. She had intended to destroy our family and steal everything valuable in our lives, but her criminal behavior had forced us to develop better communication, stronger boundaries, and deeper appreciation for genuine relationships. Emma was heading to college in the fall with a full scholarship she had earned through her own hard work. Dad was healthier and happier than he had been since Mom's death, with genuine friendships and a sense of purpose in helping other seniors avoid financial exploitation. I had built a successful consulting business helping families navigate financial fraud recovery work that felt meaningful and used my experience to help other victims of similar crimes. The life lesson I learned through this experience was profound. Sometimes the people closest to us can cause the most devastating pain, but standing up for yourself with intelligence and integrity doesn't just bring justice, it can transform your entire life in ways you never imagined possible. Fighting back against manipulation and betrayal isn't just about defending yourself. It's about refusing to let other people's choices define your future or limit your potential. As we cleaned up after Emma's graduation party, I reflected on how different my life looked compared to 6 months ago. Then I had been walking on eggshells in my childhood home, trying to keep peace with people who were systematically destroying my financial future and planning my father's murder. Now I was financially independent, professionally successful, living in my own space and part of a family that communicated honestly and supported each other through difficulties. Brenda had tried to make me feel like a leech, someone who contributed nothing and deserved nothing. Instead, her criminal behavior had forced me to discover reserves of strength and strategic thinking that I never knew I possessed. She had intended to isolate me from my family. Instead, her manipulation had ultimately brought Dad and me closer together than we had been since Mom's death. Standing in my childhood backyard watching Emma laugh with her friends while Dad cleaned up party decorations, I realized that the best revenge against people who try to destroy your life is building something even better than what they tried to take away. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who were treating you unfairly? Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are with the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally. But those battles can also teach us the most about our own strength and resilience. I'd love to hear about your experiences with family conflicts and how you found the courage to fight back when it mattered most. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it encourages you to trust your instincts when something feels wrong, to document everything when you're dealing with manipulation, and to never let anyone convince you that you deserve to be treated badly by people who claim to love you. Please like this video. If my story resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding strength in difficult situations, and share this with anyone who might be dealing with similar manipulation in their own family relationships. Remember, you have more power than you realize to change your circumstances and protect your future.